Hey everybody, it's Carm here, and Rocky's backside. Yeah, coming on after, it was just on last night, saying a few words for Pauline Oliveros, who recently passed, wonderful artist, and I wanted to come on anyway at some point and do another Gimme 10 response. Fred bigstar1000's ongoing series, going through the years and the decades, you know, showing your kind of top 10 of that particular year. And now we're on 1987, and I have mostly vinyl, 2 CDs and a cassette. And in keeping with the last couple videos, the cassette is from Valley of the Sun, a noted new age label from, well, it was very prolific during that decade, particularly from, let's say, between like 82 and 88. And this particular one's probably the most well-known release on the, among the most well-known releases on the label. Ascension to the All That Is by Robert Slapp. This is one of the first things I'd heard of his, and way back. Very, very beautiful, meditative, contemplative synthesizer music. Very much like the cover and the title. You just kind of feel like you're ascending upward. I think Dick Sutphin, who started the label, well, he's used this in his guided meditations and his seminars, his various seminars on the road. And he was saying to Robert when he made this album, make music that conveys what it would be like to go and meet God. And basically that's, you know, this is what he came up with. But I would definitely recommend it for meditation, relaxation. I believe there was a later version of this that came out on CD, I think from either 91 or 93, which sounds to be a re-recording of this. I personally would go for the original if you could find it on cassette. Probably still online for a reasonable price. Yeah, this just seems a little warmer, and yeah, just it resonates more. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it. You know, and if you're looking to get into any of the Valley of the Suns, this is a good, you know, good place to start, and especially with his music in general. And next up here, onto the CDs. Richard Lanehart, These Last Days. This way back when, maybe 10 to 15 years, was a blind buy at the local CD shop we have just up north. It's been in business for many years, and I would find so many obscurities over the years, and at least this was an obscurity to me at the time. There he is there as a young man. Yeah, wonderful electronics. This is what's playing in the background. You can hear it's sequencer based. I like his, kind of gives you a description here of his process. And I know Gary did a video, I think it was last year, in which we found we both mutually, you know, were fans of his, though neither of us knew that. Talked about going to a festival, I think it was in 2011, and seeing him live. And sadly he passed away at the end of that year. I think he was only in his late 50s, and you know, left behind you know, a real impressive wealth of music and a great deal of diversity. And yeah, for many years this is my only album of his, until Kerry did his video, and then I, you know, was sparked to look into him more. But yeah, this is just wonderful stuff. It's on the Periodic Music label, which appears to be a pretty small label. It's based in New York. I only have 2 other albums on this label, and I don't think they lasted very long, like so many labels of that kind. Also found in that CD shop, Chicago Digital. But very much recommended if you're looking to get into some of his more, this might be somewhat more active compared to, at least this particular piece of music, compared to some of other things I've heard him do. But yeah, wonderful stuff. Next up, Terry Ripdahl and the Chasers, Blue. Probably my personal favorite of Terry's is his Chasers, what's known as his Chasers period of the mid-'80s. I also like all 3 of them, for even though they're quite different from is better known like his Odyssey or After the Rain, which I agree are considered essentials of his. But it was an interesting turn he took at this point. You could say it was kind of like a power trio in a sense, although on here it seemed they went softer and more atmospheric than their first album. To me, this is very cinematic. Kind of has a kind of noirish quality. I think of like almost like a crime drama of the period, or maybe even like a TV series. Just has that kind of soundtrack feel to it. You could just imagine really enhancing like the film's pacing, and it conveys a lot of really neat imagery. And on here he plays electric guitar and keyboards, Bjorn Kjellmeyer on electric and acoustic bass, and Auden Cleve on drums and percussion. I recorded November 1986. Yeah, and it doesn't sound like 30 years old to me. I mean, it really, I think it holds up quite well. Yeah, I just spun it the other day after not hearing it for a while, and it just has a really a distinctive quality. And of course now I want to hear. I hadn't listened to the other ones for a while, the other Chasers, so I'll have to get back to those. But I think it's a nice one from this period, and different from what you'd expect from ECM. Did a lot of interesting things during the 80s, a lot of things that sort of played against type, I guess, if you want to say, what their, whatever the you consider the stereotype of the label, or, the aesthetics. So it's very interesting. Now we're on to the vinyl. This is an early favorite of mine, both the artist and the album. Chris Veirs, Desires of the Heart. Very beautiful keyboard-based, with some guitar too. Very lush, romantic. Not syrupy, but very beautiful. It's heartwarming and heartrending, but not too, not sort of over the top. I have several of his albums that came since then. I always found this to be the most, for me, the most consistent. Every piece of music on here is great. I wouldn't want to skip through any of them. And I'd recommend this over. If you're going to start with him, start at this one. He made a few albums with Paul Voudouris beforehand, or, in previous years. One of which the title escapes me, is particularly beautiful and atmospheric. But this one, I think, is his first, solo album for a major label, or CBS. But very, very beautiful. This is something I play at any time of the year, and it just always it's very uplifting, I find. Again, without being too saccharine. But a really nice place to start. I think he was from Milwaukee originally, and now, last I heard, he lives in Sedona, which is where I visit just about every year. So I got to see him perform actually with a band in I think it was '98. So that was a real treat. But very much recommended. Now I know I've showed this before as being an essential favorite, essential summertime favorite. Yellow Jackets, Four Corners. This was my intro to them back in, I think in '91, summer of '91 I heard them. A little loud. I'd heard the name before for maybe a year or so. And I know I'd heard a few tunes on the radio. Mile High in particular was got a pretty good deal of airplay on our WNUA 95.5, which is our smooth jazz station from the late 80s into the 2000s. And this would get a pretty good deal of play. Always loved this cover. Just wonderful playing. It really signaled a turn from, they were doing more of like a pop jazz thing for some years before this, and then this went into more, you could say, more of a straight ahead jazz, but also very distinctive in the use of keyboards. Russell Ferrante on the keyboards, and Jimmy Haslip bass, Mark Russo saxophones, and Will Kennedy on drums. And each member and all through the years, have all had very distinctive sounds of their own, just as individuals. But yeah, I'd start with this one. It's just such a nice album, and a lot of variety here. And see some of the guests on there. Yeah, just I think it's just essential of if you want to get into contemporary jazz, that's somewhere between straight ahead and pop. I think this is for me, one of the better places to start. And again, being could have had a better introduction. And once again, I know our good pal Gary also loves this one and finds this music particularly enjoyable for summer and evocative of that season. But although I can enjoy this just about any time. But another excellent one. And we have next up Western Spaces. Steve Roach, Kevin Braheny, and Richard Bermer. I may have showed this in the past. I know I have a second version of this on cassette, which actually is just Steve Roach and Kevin Braheny. For some reason, Richard was omitted from that one. But I believe this is the original one that came out then. And Steve Roach, Richard Bermer, Kevin Braheny. Yeah, beautiful, very, very evocative of the Southwest. And hearing this some years before I actually went out there and saw it for myself, it definitely fits wonderfully. One of my favorite pieces on here, really in general, is Across the View, which is Richard Bermer's piece. Absolutely beautiful, and of course his music was so wonderful and detailed, and always had a very shimmering quality to it. But yeah, he was one of the greats in my opinion. Would recommend this if you're a fan of any of these artists. It's still even a pretty nice introduction to them, being it's kind of in that early period in the 80s, and even being that period, it's still very kind of warm and expansive. Also on here, Kevin Braheny plays the Steiner Iwi electronic woodwind instrument, which I guess came after the Lyricon in that evolution, which has a real otherworldly quality. But yeah, it's a beauty, and it definitely takes you to that place. Just very, very evocative. It's another one that's absolutely beautiful, and I'd known the artist, but was still kind of a blind buy as far as knowing what this would sound like. Anthony Phillips, Slow Waves, Soft Stars, Private Parts and Pieces 7. Did a whole series of these albums, very very different from one another. Some are more similar than others, but this is one that particularly stood out for me, and the cover really conveys it. Wonderfully atmospheric, just very very expansive. It's really kind of, I'd call it like imagination music. I just remember being very beautiful and lyrical. A really nice blend of various synthesizers and acoustic guitars played by him, and there's also a guest on there. But yeah, just absolutely beautiful, evocative, shimmering music. Instrumental. I think some of his other albums of this series may have had vocals, but of course, Anthony Phillips from Genesis, or from the very beginning of Genesis. But yeah, I would really recommend this if you're into the more contemplative side of things. Just yeah, a real beauty. I think out of all of these, this is the one I haven't listened to in the longest. So amidst everything else I've been spinning, the records I found with Chris, I might have to weave this in there somewhere. But yeah, just really gorgeous from what I remember. Now next up, this is one of the albums I thought was from '86, or came out in '86. But really, really to me, a very impressive statement, and very very powerful for its time. Keith Jarrett, Book of Ways. This is, let's see, clavichord. It's a double album of solo clavichord improvisations. And as I was listening to this, I was thinking to myself, some of the other jazz keyboardists of his generation during that time, mid to late 80s, were doing some really interesting things with, various keyboards, synthesizers, like like Synclavier and the Fairlight. But here comes Keith Jarrett with a solo album of double album of solo clavichord improvisations. I mean, what could be a less 1980s thing to do than an album like this? For me, that alone is makes this really special, and the playing is fascinating. Some of the sounds and the approach that he takes to the instrument, which, as you'd expect, are not always conventional. Times it almost sounds like maybe like a prepared guitar, like maybe like an acoustic guitar with something stuck in between the strings, or it gets a lot of different tones out of it. And some pieces sound like they're very traditional classical, although again, improvisational. Others are very minimalist. Others are almost funky at times, which you'd never associate with this instrument, really. But altogether, though, it's some pieces I like more than others. But it's just I think a fascinating document of, again, something the last thing you would expect, during this time period. And it's just just for that alone, it's very admirable and fascinating achievement. So we definitely recommend at least sampling this and seeing what you think, because I don't think there's a lot of examples of this around in the last 30, 40 years. So always fascinating. And got a couple more here. It's another one I know I've shown before, but to me it's an essential album from this artist. David Arkenstone, Valley in the Clouds. I believe this is his first album, and another one where the cover really conveys what you're hearing. Very, very melodic, primarily electronic music, synthesizers, grand piano, guitar, harp, fretless bass. He plays most everything on here. There's Daniel Chase on percussion, and it's recorded between July and December of 1986. I believe he's also local. I think he's from the Chicago area originally, and maybe he was there at the time. Yeah, just very beautiful, melodic. Like some of the previous ones, very just evokes all kinds of imagery. Again, very much like the cover. It's something I've listened to so many times. It's like I don't know. It really kind of comes to be part of you in a way. Like Ray Lynch's music or Vangelis. It's almost hard to find words anymore, but also quite eclectic. I mean, you could hear later on he played in larger groups, and you could hear more influences coming out. But you could hear a little bit of, you could hear some rock, maybe even little jazz-like touches, but classical. But yeah, always a very distinctive style. This is another one kind of like the Desires of the Heart, which for me, no album really came quite up to this one for my personal taste. It's just to me, it's just every tune is perfect, and it just everything I want to, you don't want to skip one song on here, I find, and just flows together beautifully. And it's real easy to find if you're curious about this. You find them. I find these around. I mean, sad to say, in like dollar bins. I mean, but and the Narada stuff, a lot of it gets all out of print now, but you can still find them pretty cheap for the most part. But, yeah, another wonderful one. And finally here, Mark Isham, Art Landy, We Begin. Another example of an ECM from this period, which maybe somewhat plays against type of what it was known for. Although this is very atmospheric and does have that kind of melancholic, yearning quality that so much ECM has. I recorded in January of '87, and you have Mark Isham on trumpet, flugelhorn, piccolo trumpet, synthesizer, percussion, Art Landy, piano, synthesizer, percussion. Probably a little more like an Isham album, as far as kind of reminds you of like vapor drawings or film music, some of his earlier stuff. And I always loved this cover, of course. So many other covers are like that. And again, that kind of says it all right there. I like how the first piece, it starts off with the drum machine, just kind of, it's almost like throwing the gauntlet down, saying this is going to be something different than you might expect. But I think it works very well all the same. And yeah, the pieces are kind of divided between the two of them, compositionally. But, yeah, another one very much recommended if you like either of them, and you want to hear an ECM that's just a little different. And again, that decade was really did some really fascinating things, which I liked. They kind of were trying some different approaches. So yeah, another beauty. So yeah, just wanted to do a few more of those. I don't know if Fred's going to be going into the 90s or not, but I probably might have some lined up when that time comes. So yeah, hope you're all well. I just wanted to make sure I came on and did this. Sorry if I seemed a little rushed. I have a busy week coming up, and I don't want to wait too long to do a response. So well, here it is. Well, so from Rocky and I, who's pretty much dozing now. Well, till next time. Peace, love, and joy.